All right, let's talk about data grids, how to bind the data and how to style your actual data grid. So you can see that I have a style data grid here. It doesn't look particularly good in the context of my application. It does not fit in. I just decided to copy all the styling over from my semester project and add the bonus property of the white background just to demonstrate how you can change the styling. So first things first, I think it's a bit hard to see, but when I hover over the column here, you can see it turns a little bit darker. Then I also changed the font color of the headers. And if I actually load my data, you can see I have here a format for my dates, and I have styling for the row and the item that is currently selected, which all looks different in the default data grid. So let me demonstrate that to you. Okay, right now I have deleted all the styling information and my application is set to a light theme. This is what the data grid looks like on a light theme. It doesn't even have a background. And you can see if I load my data, even then it doesn't have a background, although graciously the header has a background. So yeah, you can see when I select data, it has a nice purple, but it doesn't look too good. And obviously you will want to adapt this to your own application style. So I'm going to undo my changes here so that when I rerun the application, we can see it with the proper style. So I will show you how to set up your data grid from scratch, which I will do in this here view. You remember from last time, this is the view model switching that I introduced. So let's go ahead and set up our data grid. Now, first things first, you want to open your CS project file and make sure that you have a package reference to avalonia.controls.datagrid. If you don't, just run .net add package avalonia.controls.datagrid. The next thing you want to make sure is, in general, all your Avalonia related packages need to have the exact same version string. If one of them doesn't, you can install the proper version by deleting the package reference, saving your file, and then reinstalling the package with the, I believe it is the -- version. The -- version, what's it called? Property, command, whatever. Or you just change it directly in here and it should download the right files at runtime. Now, let's go over what I actually have. In my models folder, I've created a CSV helper model. This, in the topics of your semester projects, will be most likely your source data manager, and it will have a lot more than this. So I created a sample CSV file, or rather ChatGPT created a sample CSV file with a few names, birth dates, and countries, just to display some data. I've changed that in assets/data.csv. Now, you can see here my public struct, first name, last name, date of birth, country, and this is how I read the data. You should already have all of this set up, which is why I'll just show it here. I won't explain it. Just maybe a few things. In Denmark, if you use the Danish culture info, you have a delimiter of comma. I believe the same applies for ENUS. But what gave me a big headache earlier is, just for funsies, because I'm using German date formatting, I wanted to use the German culture info. And it turns out that CSV helper uses the culture info to get the default delimiter, which in German is a semicolon, and the error message will tell you nothing along the lines of wrong delimiter. It will just say header not found. So that was a fun one to figure out. So make sure you've set the right culture info for your delimiters if you actually have issues reading your source data with CSV helper. Okay. That aside, another thing to note is if you have a set data that is just like pre-programmed, because you're supposed to read it from a CSV file for your semester project, and it is just set in a folder. You want to make sure that when you call it, you want to use a relative path. So you can see my program.cs, which obviously will be executed, to my data CSV has a relative path of assets/data.csv. If you just use this relative path in your coding, it will not work. What you need to do is you need to go into your CS project and you need to create this item group down here where you include the assets folder with the backslash and 2 asterisks to include everything in the assets folder, and copy to output directory is preserve newest. That way, when you .NET run your application, this whole folder is copied to your output directory and the data can be worked with relative paths. Now, of course, if you have an open file selector and you actually open your file in your Avalonia project, then you won't need this. But for all of those who have like set files, it is good practice to have relative paths and no absolute paths like C, users, Nick, desktop, because with absolute paths, there is no guarantee that it will be the same on every system. In fact, it is actually unlikely. Okay. With that out of the way, let's actually talk about how we can work with our DataGrid. So you have installed the DataGrid project, you have installed the DataGrid. My English is lacking whenever I'm recording something. Package, there you go. You installed the DataGrid package. One important thing that you have to do, because if you don't do that, your DataGrid won't even appear no matter what you do, is you have to include the DataGrid styles in your app.axaml, and it looks like this. Put it in your applications.styles. If you just Google Avalonia DataGrid and you go on the website of Avalonia itself, then you will find this line for copying there. And it will also tell you how to install the package. So you can read up there. Just Google Avalonia DataGrid. Now, with all the prerequisites out of the way, let's actually get to some, I don't know, action. Okay, so we want to do this in our new view.axaml. And yeah, I'm just going to create a stacked panel with a vertical orientation. Because as you know, in the content of your user control, there can only be like one item. So I'll just use a stack panel here to keep my data grid in. Now, the data grid has a lot of options. I'm going to show you a few. First of all, you want to set your width. I'm going to set mine to 500, and you also want to set your height. I'm going to use 300 here. Now, if your data grid is contained in, say, a regular grid, and that already has a fixed size, or you actually want a relative size, say it's in a grid that in a grid column and row that has a relative size set with a little asterisk, then instead of width and height, what you want to do is you want to use horizontal, no, not horizontal alignment, horizontal, 1 second. Okay, it was actually horizontal alignment. You want to use stretch. You could see there were a few more options. Left, center, left, right, and stretch. This is for within the object, or like within the view. Not the view, but like the object where it's contained. Say it's a grid. And you can do the same for the vertical alignment, of course. But I'm working with a fixed size here. Okay. DataGrid has a lot of options. Let's get to them. So everything related to your width and height or horizontal alignment you want to have in the first line. Also, if it's contained in a grid, row and column, you also want to have that in your first line. And after that, you will give all the DataGrid options, starting, of course, with our item source. And in our case, it will be a binding, and I'm going to call this items. Going to call this items data. Items data is a good one, yeah. Is read only. I will set to true, so no changes can be made to your data. You have the vertical scroll bar visibility, which I recommend you set to auto. That basically means that the scroll bar is only visible when you hover your mouse over the data grid, which is very nice. It just makes everything look a bit cleaner. Next thing is the grid lines visibility. You can have all, horizontal, none, or vertical. For me, I will use all. Then there's a few can user properties. You have reorder columns, resize columns, and sort columns. I will set all of those to... Actually, I'll set them all to true because they were false in the last one, and we can actually directly see the differences. Can user resize columns, true, and can user sort columns, true. Then you can also set your border thickness. I will set it to 1, and you can also set your border brush, which I will set to 1D, 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 which is dark gray. Okay. So much for your data grid. Make sure to close that again. And in your data grid, you want to have datagrid dot, oops, you want to have datagrid dot columns. Make sure to close that. And in your datagrid columns, you have datagrid text columns. I will set the width to auto. That just sets the width to either the content size or the header size, whichever is higher, but you can of course also give it a static width. Header is what is actually going to be displayed at the top, so first name in this case, and then you can have a binding, and in my case it will be binding first name, and you can close that. Now, I will quickly write the other ones and then I will be back. Now, I've written the other ones. You can see at the date of birth one, we have a string format. Now, string formats are a really cool thing. They allow you to, well, format your string within Avalonia. For the most part, it's the C# syntax, but there are a good amount of differences. So I will maybe make a video on how to like format your strings in multiple ways. Some are easy, like with the string format. Some are more complicated, like if you want a subscript or a superscript, that can get more complicated. But for now, we can use this string format to format the date. If you, for example, have time in there, you can also give it hour, minute, minute. Make sure to make the M for minutes lowercase because uppercase is already reserved for month. But yeah, that is my string format. Now, you can see all of those have a binding, a header, and an automatic width. Okay, so, oops. You want to make sure that you have your view models namespace defined and that you are actually have the data type view model. So if you have that, you can head into your view models and we can look at the new view model. So first things first, I will make sure it has a constructor. There you go. In this view model, we now need a few things. So first things first, this using directive here, systems.collections.generic, we will need that. Same as using project.gui or your namespace, whichever that may be, .models, because that's where our CSV helper model is. If your source data manager is somewhere else, it shouldn't be. For proper MVVM, your business logic goes in the models folder, but that's okay. Just use that namespace directive. Perfectly fine, don't worry. And of course, make sure that you are including it in your project.gui.cs project via a project reference. And the project reference can look like this. It is just an item group and it refers to the project. So my space ... to go to the parent folder because we are in project.gui. So we need to go in the parent folder where our project.gui and project.tests folders are located. Then we go to the project folder and then of course we select project.cs project. That is a project reference. So yeah, if your source data manager is in a different project, you need to use this project reference in your CS project file to actually work with it. Okay, so we have a source data manager in models. Let's continue. What we need is a public observable collection. I should spell it right. Observable collection. And in here is going to be the data type. So in my case, it's CSV helper model.data. Remember, that is the class or the struct where your CSV data is saved. Give it a name, items data, because that's what I bound it to. And yeah, we'll just give it a getter and a setter. Oh, there you go. Okay, so we will also create public void load data. This happens at the press of a button. The logic I put in here, you can also just put in your constructor. Speaking of the constructor, we of course need a reference to our CSV helper model. So we create a private CSV helper model. There you go. Why is... Oh, that's why. Uppercase, there you go. And we need to set our CSV helper model to new CSV helper model. And in my case, I want to be pointing at my data with a relative path. Yeah, that's just what the constructor takes as an argument. It might be different to you. Just make sure you have the object reference so you can actually work with your source data manager. And then you need to set your items data is, also needs to be initialized. There you go. Yeah. Okay. So the function you want to use, there's two different ways to write these. The easiest way is you just use an for each loop. So for each var underscore in CSV helper model.getData, and it will just be items data.add and the underscore. This is the, well, easy way. A more compact way would be to write CSV helper model.getData, and yeah, I had an autocomplete here, but there you go. This is the easy way. Just remove the unnecessary lambda expression, and yeah, it's just for each items data.add. That is also a simple way, a bit shorter, a bit more compact, how you can load your data. And yeah, I believe that is actually it. So if I just copy my button over from the previous project and put that below the data grid in the stack panel, that should work. Yeah, so we of course know this one. So we changed the view. Now we have the unstyled one. We hit load data, and there you have it, your data. Okay, so as you can see, I can click here to sort by country, sort by name, sort by date of birth. I can resize, I can reorder. Those are all set here. Can user reorder columns, can user resize columns, and can user sort columns. These three options are for that behavior. As you know, in my previous one, in the previous styled example, I set all of those to no. Now, we will go over the styling a bit more quickly. So what I will do is I will copy in my style from the other one, and then we will just run the application, have a look at it, and go over what each selector does. Right. There you go. Okay. Let's make sure we can get both in view. Okay. So that's visible. Now, I should maybe put this on the... yeah, okay, whatever. Now it's also good. So we have our styles here. I'll close the stack panel so it's focused only on the styles here. Can I make it a bit bigger? Yeah, perfect. Okay. Now we can have a look at the styles. So you put your styles in user control.styles right below your user control definition. And the way styles work is you have a big style section, right? And that style has a selector which selects an object. So in this case, we are selecting the whole data grid. Inside, you have setters. The setters have a property, foreground. So foreground is text color. And the value is set to 1D, 1D, 1D. So that sets the text color of all of those items to 1D, 1D, 1D. Vertical grid lines brush. Those. You can see they're also not quite black here. They're also this lighter shade of gray. The grid lines and the text, they seem to have a different shade of gray. Oh, no, wait. Yeah, they are a different shade of gray. I can't, yeah. Here's 1D, 1D, 1D. Here's D1, D1, D1. But what I meant to say is they might have a different shade of gray. Because your grid brush size might be very small. Like 1 pixel, for instance. Which on some monitors is going to get rendered lighter than your text. So just keep that in mind, that you use a grid brush, like line grid brush, that might work on multiple systems. Just to make, just to make sure. You can do the same for horizontals, and of course for the background, which I this time properly set to white. So yeah, that's just kind of the whole thing as a whole. The next selector we want to look at, or maybe yeah, I think it's a good idea if I cut this out. Then I'm just going to run this in debug view, because then we can restart it easily. Okay, so now it looks like this. Let's put it on the left. Yep, there you go. Okay, so the next header we will have a look at is the DataGrid text block. So DataGrid text block is not a selector of itself. What I mean is, so we're hitting F12 to get this nice debug menu, and we never get our logical tree until we get to DataGrid, and then we change to the visual tree, where we can expand the DataGrid and we get all the things that it is made up of. So rows presenter, DataGrid row, border, cell presenter, cell, border, grid. Yeah, there you go. Finally, I found the text block. This text block is responsible for actually writing. Yeah, you can see the text is Sophia in here. This text block is the actual one that writes the data. And you can see it's super deep in, which is why we can just use this selector here to select the data grid, but then every text block in that data grid, no matter how deep it is. So I have a text wrapping, wrap with overflow, which basically, I think I can resize it. It's a bit hard here. But for instance, in my semester project, I had date time, right? Where there was a space after the date and the time. So what that would do is it would wrap with overflow. So because it was too narrow, it would put the time in the next column. It doesn't do that by default, but it might be very useful, especially for the headers. And I set the font family to Roboto Mono, which I just copied over from my previous project. I don't actually have the font installed. But Roboto Mono is a really good font that you might want to use. Actually, once we're done with this, I am just going to install the font and show you how to do that and use that font, because a monospace font for presenting your data is a really good idea, and you will see why. Don't worry about that now, though. So yeah, that is the DataGrid text block. Let's look at the next style, and oh well, let's run it again. So we get the next style. Okay, so the next style focuses, there you go. The next style focuses on the DataGrid column header, which is a selector. It doesn't even need to be in DataGrid because it's unique. So if a DataGrid column header, which is this beauty right here, there's also a DataGrid row header if you have, well, header rows, because a DataGrid is more complex than just this. We can set a background. I set it to this nice red. You can set the foreground, which is of course for the text color. And then you can also set a separator brush, which in this case, I gave it a lighter shade of white. So you can see it's actually a different color than this one, because this separator brush works way better with my background color that I have here than this gray would, which is really cool that you can set a separate separator brush. And last but not least, let's have a look at the final style, which is all text blocks in the DataGrid column header. And yeah, we have a font weight, semi-bold, and font family, Noto. Yeah, let's rerun it a final time to have a look at what that actually looks like. I don't need to debug it actually. And now they should be virtually indistinguishable. Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, you can now see it's also, the text is now semi-bold. I prefer semi-bold over bold. It's distinguishable enough and it's easier to read than proper bold. Now, last but not least, we will talk about custom fonts. And I will just pause real quick to get everything ready, because this is sort of a spontaneous idea, and then we will continue. Okay, luckily using a custom font is really easy. So first of all, you want to get your fonts, and Google Fonts is just honestly the best resource for it. You want to go to fonts.google.com, and then you want to look for your fonts. For example, Noto. Noto Sans is a really popular font. It looks really good. It looks better than the default in Avalonia. So yeah, you just click on Get Font. That puts it in your sort of shopping bag. Then you click Fonts up here to search for another one. So I will type in Roboto Roboto Mono. Here it is. Though Noto Sans also has mono, I just like this one a little bit better. Either way, you can also select it. You then hit download all, and they will be put in a zip archive, which of course you want to extract. Now, it's going to look like this. What you need to do, and I will put this aside real quick, in your assets folder, you want to right click, create a new folder labeled fonts. Okay? And in this fonts folder, you go into your Noto Sans, then you go into static, and you select all of those, Control A, and just drag them into your fonts folder. You do the same with Roboto Mono, static, drag them in, and that is literally all you have to do. You see we've already selected the font family. Oops. You see we've selected the font family property in our setters for the text blocks, Roboto Mono and Noto for our headers. And that is all we have to do. So if I change the view, load my data, you can see in the date of birth here, where we're actually working with numbers, that is where the monospace font shines, because all the numbers, be it a 1 or a wider number like a 2, have the same width in this font, meaning that even 1207-1968, which has 2 ones in it, is the same length as 2111-2001, which has 4 ones in it. That is a monospace font. It will make your numerical data look really good, and you can just easily use them. Yeah. Last but not least, a tiny thing. If you want to have your fonts globally, like for all your text, you want to go into your app AXAML, and in your application.styles, oops, there you go. I like to leave some space. I'll just copy it over because it's quicker than typing it all in. You can use a style for selector enable, set the font family, and then you can use a style of select the text block, set the font family. This will put this font family like globally in your entire application, unless you override it somewhere. You can always override it. Say you want to use a monospace font or just a different font. You can always override it. But yeah, so much for the DataGrid. You can see it is actually really easy once you wrap your head around it, and the styling is also relatively simple once you know which items you can work with. One last thing. This is not all you can style in the DataGrid. This is just a selection. Oh yeah, speaking of, I should explain this selector real quick. So DataGrid row, we have another style in there, right? So you have this little hat colon selected. That means I click the row and it is selected, and then DataGrid cell. So this basically, this selected means the DataGrid row when it is selected, and as you remember from earlier, a space means all text blocks within that DataGrid. So in this case, all DataGrid cells within that selected DataGrid row, and then I'll set the background. That's how I got the custom background to this light red instead of the default purple. That just quickly to mention. But yeah, if you need to find more things that you want to style. You just hit load data. There you go. Okay, you just hit F11. You navigate to your, oops. Huh? Oh, yeah, of course. It's in the main app view. There you go. You navigate to your data grid, change it to the visual tree, and then have fun diving in there. It's gonna take you a bit to find your custom thing, but that is how I found all of those. Okay, I don't want to hold you up any longer. This is already long enough. All of those videos turn out very long. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I explain every aspect of it to make sure everyone can fully understand everything. I know how frustrating it can be to some of you that the pace is so slow, but I also know that others need it. So yeah, it's only fair to do it like that. I will also, at this point, put the source code on GitHub to all of this, so you can just copy stuff back and forth. I will delete the fonts folder, though, before I put it on GitHub, just to save some space. Okay, yeah, that is all. Thank you for watching, and yeah, good luck on your projects.